As a child in the 1960s, Kate Tolman was raised in Silicon Valley. She was subjected to many forms of programming, including MK Ultra Nazi programming involving Josef Mengele, which was designed to create a super race of people of superior intelligence to usher in the Fourth Reich, aka New World Order. Kay was also taken to Catholic monasteries, churches, and the Vatican where satanic rituals and Jesuit programming occurred. This type of programming involves a Jesuit oath and creation of an army of internal soldiers to protect the Pope. But God saved Kay, delivered her, and set her free. She believes the only way to freedom and healing from ritual abuse is through Jesus Christ. Amen to that. Today, she doesn't see herself as a survivor of MK Ultra and mind control programming, but her identity being firmly grounded in Christ as a beloved daughter of the Most High. This is the Counterculture Mom Show. I'm your host, Tina Griffin, and our mission is to expose Satan's lies and blast the truth of MK Ultra to the masses. I'm with founder of Revelation Gateway Ministries, Kay Elise Tolman. Kay, thank you so much for jumping on the program today.
Thank you for having me, Tina. I'm excited to be here.
Excited, and I got to tell you, my heart is beating out of my chest. Literally, I'm like telling it to calm down here. I was looking at your show notes. We have about 48 questions, and we're probably going to have to do a part two, so I'm glad you're willing to do that. I don't even know where to begin. Kay, you went through all kinds of abuse at a very young age. In the 1960s, Monarch programming began through the U.S. Army and CIA with Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aquino in San Francisco. Can you talk about how you suffered Monarch military mind control programming, including the programming to create Manchurian candidates, which are sleeper assassins? What in the world is all that, and how did you get involved?
Well, it began for me in utero, actually, which is true for many SRA survivors. The abuse begins in utero, and I was subjected to Kabbalah rituals at birth. And one of the reasons the trauma begins so early is so that they can intentionally cause a shattering of the soul. And so if they can create fractured parts of the heart, we call them parts or alter identities. In the 90s, we referred to it as multiple personality disorder. But today, I just call them parts. They're just little parts. But the fracturing is done intentionally so that programmers can later assign an identity and instructions to those parts. So that is part of how mind control programming works. It involves the fractured pieces of the heart. It involves, think of it kind of like a computer with software instructions, and the little parts are the operators that operate the computer. My father has an Illuminati bloodline, and I was born into the Illuminati. My father worked for Lockheed, so a lot of the programming that happened in the 60s and 70s, the CIA chose candidates from military families that also had occult backgrounds, and so both of my parents had lengthy occult backgrounds. So I have a royal bloodline on my father's side. It's a Stuart bloodline, which is a very common, Mary Queen of Scots, very common bloodline. And there were a lot of SRA survivors that have come through that bloodline. Anyway, back to your question. So I was born into a family, I believe. My father served in World War II in Germany. He spoke German. I believe he met Mengele there. And I do have a memory of Mengele saying to me, "I know your father." From in utero, they decided that they would use me for their programming. They did a significant amount of experimentation. So there's a couple of different types of programs. So MK Ultra was one of the early programs. Actually, the earliest was called Artichoke. Then they had one called Bluebird. and MK Ultra. So MK Ultra stands for mind control. It's a German version of mind control. So mind control Ultra, and much of the material for the designs of those programs, I believe, came from Josef Mengele and his research with prisoners at Auschwitz. So I lived in Silicon Valley, not far from Moffett Field, where NASA was. Well, Werner von Braun was one of the Nazis that came over with Operation Paperclip. So there were a lot of Nazis actually in Moffett Field, between NASA and Lockheed and the complex there. So then just 50 miles away was the Presidio, San Francisco, which was an Army base where Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aquino was also doing programming. He was doing programming through the Army. And there's a famous case, the Presidio daycare case, that was tried, I believe, back in the 80s, if I'm not mistaken on the dates there. But Michael Aquino was a professed Satanist. He had partnered with Anton LaVey in 1966 for the opening of the Satanic Church. And then they had what you would call a church split. And so Michael Aquino moved on with Temple Set, and Anton LaVey kept the Satanic Church in San Francisco. I had a sister in San Francisco, a half-sister that lived in San Francisco. We made frequent trips to San Francisco, and I believe I was subjected to programming at the Presidio. I actually have memories even as a young adult teenager at the Presidio. So essentially what took place there was different types of programs. So in order to create a Manchurian candidate, which is a sleeper assassin, they had to create multiple personalities, or what we call today DID.
Can you explain what sleeper assassins is?
Certainly. So when a dissociated, we call it DID, a dissociated personality is tucked back inside behind an amnesic barrier or a programming wall. So this part is trained by the military, trained to use rifles, I was trained as a sharpshooter. Even today when I go to the range, people are like, they call me Annie Oakley, because I'm still really good with a gun. So essentially what they do is they train this part and then they hide the part back inside the system. So a system is all of a person. We call it a system. But these dissociated parts are typically put behind amnesic barriers or programming walls. So a wall would be something like telling the parts inside, you're safer behind this barrier. Don't ever come out. Don't ever tell the host personality that you're back here. And the only time you come out from behind the wall is if we call for your code, or we specifically call you up when you hear your name, then you come up. So those are called programming triggers. So the part is told specifically what to listen for. Otherwise, they're to be quiet and asleep. They're awakened when their trigger or their code is heard.
So this was going on in the military, still is going on today. This is MK Ultra, a specific kind of programming called Manchurian candidate, sleeper assassins. They're ready to kill when they're called to go do the damage.
Absolutely.
Okay. You're teaching me Manchurian candidate 101 class today. So let's say they gave the code, the Army gave the code, and the sleeper assassins that were called, what are some things that these people would be called to do?
Well, for instance, they might be told to wait on the top of a building. When you see this person in this color coat, you're to take the target out. So when they train a child, children are like, I don't want to kill anybody. And they'll say, oh no, you're not really hurting them. It's a target. And your job is to make the target fall down.
Wow.
And so the child will sit on the building, the top of the building with the weapon and wait for the target to come by.
So wait,
they'll test.
Are you telling me that the Army, all branches of military are and have been brainwashing children to carry out these assignments?
Absolutely.
This
using
is the first
taxpayer dollars. That's what makes me mad.
This makes complete sense, but I've never heard this before. This is going to be I don't know where to start. I'm speechless, and that usually never happens. Okay. So you were a part of the Manchurian candidate sleeper assassin program in San Francisco underneath this Lieutenant Aquino. What did he do you remember anything that he had you do or carry out?
Well, what I will tell you is what happened to me one time. I remember being picked up by a military helicopter, and I was taken to the Presidio. I estimate I was about 19 or 20 years old. And I was taken to the facility, and I was interrogated. And that's one of the things they do. They'll test the programming with interrogation. See, if a personality is tucked behind the barrier, they test it to see if the personality will come out. So they don't want the personality to come out except upon command. So in my case, what they did is they said, you've been talking. Now, speaking about these things was absolutely forbidden. And I was threatened every single time. If you ever say a word, if you ever speak, we will kill you. So I was waterboarded. And so they waterboarded me, and they said, you've been talking. And they nearly drowned me. I'm asthmatic. So of course I had an asthma attack. They nearly drowned me. And they said, let this be a lesson to you. You never speak of this again. And they put me back on the Army helicopter. I was there with several men in fatigues, drove me back flew me back to where I was living at that time.
Oh my gosh. Were there a lot of other kids that were being trained to be Manchurian candidates, sleeper assassins when you were in that program?
Certainly.
Like how many kids are we talking?
The Cult Awareness Network estimated that 2% of the population was SRA. In every state of the union, there were SRA survivors. They were calling in from every county, every town, all across the nation. People were calling in, reporting ritual abuse. So if 2% of the population, and we have over 350 million people, that's 7 million SRA survivors. And then one of the things that they do in the underground bases is they will have breeders down there, and they'll breed children to create their army of soldiers in the underground bases.
I'm going to ask some dumb questions, but I got to ask them. Are you saying that adults would cause children to get pregnant as children to have more children?
Yes.
How early of a child are we talking?
I was 10 when I had my first baby.
Oh my gosh.
I had 6 children. They took 6 of my children.
Obviously, didn't know
most were murdered.
Story.
Most of them were murdered. But
most of your children were murdered. Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh, this is so evil.
It's as evil as it gets. And part of my calling today is not only to expose it, but I teach people on this subject. I teach people how to deprogram. what deprogramming is, how they install it, how to break it. This is something the world needs to know today, because quite frankly, COVID was a giant program
Absolutely.
over the
Okay.
population. So
I am literally speechless and I'm trying to wrap my brain around what you just said, but I'm going to get it and come back right after we're from our sponsor. We're digging in deep to what in the world happened to you and how you got out of it. Approximately half of all kids are exposed to porn by accident. However, you can help your child quit porn or never even start by having accountability. The Covenant Eyes app monitors your child's devices, while the Victory app gives you a comprehensive feed of their device activity and alerts you if explicit material is accessed. Get Covenant Eyes free for 30 days by texting the word VICTORY to the number 66866. That's VICTORY to 66866. Let's keep our kids porn free. I don't even know where to start. I don't know if we're ever going to end. I could talk to you for 17 hours. I want to arrest about 17,495 people right now and rescue 5 million children after what you just said. What a bomb you just dropped on us all. All right, let's go into Disney. We have to talk about Disney. Mind control, manipulation, all a big honking agenda, much bigger than just LGBTQ and the destruction of the family. Let's just hammer this beast home here today, Kay. Tell us about Disney and what's really going on with them.
well, people should know Disney was an Illuminist. He was demolay. He was involved with the Freemasons. He was an Illuminist. So his whole agenda, it looked like a nice amusement park, but his agenda was a programming site for children. When they do mind control programming, the Disney stories are used. And think about how genius this was. So they would program a child with a story like Sleeping Beauty, and they would tell the child, all your little parts, because of the trauma, now you've got 100 little parts. We're going to put all the parts to sleep. They're now Sleeping Beauty. So they put all the little parts to sleep. Then they say, and if you're a good girl, we'll take you to Disneyland. So they would take the children to Disneyland. And late at night, they would hold rituals there. And they would reinforce the programming with Sleeping Beauty dresses and gowns and the whole story. And then what happens for the traumatized child is there's a shift between what is reality and what is unreality.
Yeah.
What's real and what's not real. At Disneyland, it looks real. So the genius of it is, then I grow up and I read Disney stories to my children. And every time I read Sleeping Beauty, it's reinforcing my programming and installing the program in my child, who then grows up and has children, and then grandma reads the stories. Well, today you cannot watch a Disney show without all of the witchcraft, all of the occultism, all of the programming stories. And then they reintroduce the stories. They upgrade, like Wizard of Oz or Alice in Wonderland. They upgrade the stories to appeal to a younger audience, but it continues to reinforce the programming that was originally done.
And this is all, you're telling me a true story. It's exactly what Disney's been doing for decades.
Absolutely. I've worked with hundreds of SRA survivors. I've done over 10,000 hours of ministry counseling. And I've worked with many. This was when I was living in Portland. So there were a lot of Californians moved up to Portland. So a number of the survivors I worked with would tell me stories about Disneyland at night. They would use the small world. So they would take the little boat into the small world, and it would go back behind, back inside, back behind, and they'd pull the children off and do rituals. Small world.
You're telling me right now that that's what they actually did. Anyone that plans on taking their family to Disney better do a major U-turn this summer and not give one more dollar to Disney. I'm speechless, and that hardly happens today because I'm thinking of all these things I want to ask you. The 666 in the word Disney. I've been studying that, first saw that actually in film class at Cal State Los Angeles. Is that really 666 in Disney's, in Disney's sign?
Absolutely. Think about the layout of Disneyland. It starts like a wheel and it's called the weenie. That's what Disney called it when they opened in the 1950s.
We'll be back with more dirt on Disney right after a word from our sponsor.
We are in a cancel culture. Is your money safe? Are you holding it in a place that shares your conservative Christian values? If your funds are not with a financial institution that shares your values, they may be in jeopardy if you are not in agreement with their secular values. American Christians could lose billions of charitable donations without even knowing it. Capstone Legacy Foundation's charter ensures that we follow donor intent. Please go to capstonelegacy.org to help us see if you need to change where you are holding your assets for planned giving. That's capstonelegacy.org.
We have so much to talk about in part two. I want to ask you about the Denver International Airport with what's underground there, because I've heard a ton of stuff for years living in LA, what's really going on there, why it took so long to finish. The demonic Lucifer horse on the front lawn, that's there for a reason. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about our education system and your I want to get back to that when you talked about children that are taken from preschools for this ritual Manchurian candidate, all of it. We got to dig into that. So that's going to be in part two. But before I let you go, if people are tuning in to your part one right now, hey, you're here. You're just as shocked as I am. I know it. Share this with everybody you know. Get this out to the masses. We have a 4-part series on this entire demonic deception going on right here with MK Ultra. Just go to counterculturemom.com. Click on these episodes, watch all four of these, Kay. I'm blown away by how well they fit together and gives a really good, robust look at what's really going on with this indoctrination and I don't even know what the mind control and how it's been happening for years. So check out the 4-part series. But Kay, before we let you go, I want people to know where they can get information from you to go deeper because you have several books that are absolutely phenomenal. So your website, Kay, is rgmconnect.com. What will people find there? They'll know what to find there, but what can they find there that goes more into detail from what we just talked about today?
What I want to do is provide people various different ways to receive some training. I have these upcoming workshops. I'm going to be doing mind control deprogramming training for people in Corinth, Texas in September and October. I also have an academy for those that are really serious. It is a 2-year program. It is master's level. It is not accredited, but it is a 2-year program. We spend 30 weeks unpacking and understanding mind control programming.
How does someone know if they have been involved with that to then say, we got to get this amazing workshop? Are there red flags that family members can say, you might have been underneath this?
Yeah, I really recommend, I have a new book out. It's called Serving SRA Survivors. And in this book, it's a guide for Christian ministers and professionals. But one of the things I do is I outline a number of different red flags, indicators, that kind of thing. And there's a long list. So taken individually, maybe not. But once you start looking at a long list of components that fit your life, there's a good chance that you need some ministry for ritual abuse recovery.
So this is absolutely phenomenal. I also want to tell people you wrote a book called Move with Compassion, a new wineskin for healing and deliverance. What can we find in this book?
This is a book about, so deliverance for a lot of people has been a scary, awful thing, and Hollywood has made it very scary. But in this book, there are a couple of chapters in the back on how to peacefully, gently provide deliverance for people with DID, acknowledging the parts in the system and working safely with them for deliverance and healing.
Everybody tuning in, if you're currently listening to this via radio or podcast, you have to go to counterculturemom.com, click on this episode and watch it. You will get our evidence and the resource links, everything we talked about surrounding this episode right there at counterculturemom.com. Download the Counterculture Mom app, get premium, and turn on those notifications. Kay, your info is going to be flowing through our app as well, so people can get directly connected with you that way. And then once again, you can go to her website at rgmconnect.com. Typically, we do 1 episode per person. I'm having you for 2, maybe more. Don't go anywhere. Right after this, we'll bring it back for part 2 on the Counterculture Mom Show. Thank you, everybody. Share this program with the masses.